Hi, everybody, and welcome to Accessibility Talks, the monthly virtual meetup where we chat about digital accessibility, inclusivity, and usability. Each month, we invite a speaker to present a topic, and afterwards, we invite the community to ask questions and participate in the discussion. I'm your host today. My name is April Sides. I work at Red Hat, and I am based in Asheville, North Carolina. My pronouns are she, they. So before we get too far into the talk, I want to let you know that we have live transcripts available. And here is a QR code if you want to use your phone, I guess. And the link is bit.ly/A11YTALKS dash transcripts. So you can look for the link in the chat. You can also enable the YouTube closed captions if that works better for you. All right, so let's take a moment to remind everyone that our group seeks to provide a friendly and safe environment. We require all participants, this includes speakers and hosts, those watching on YouTube, and folks commenting on social networks, to adhere to the Accessibility Talks Code of Conduct. Again, this applies to all community interactions and events, and verbal questions, as well as chat and text channels. This code of conduct can be found on our website at alleytalks.com. That's A11YTALKS. All participants should be able to engage in productive dialogue and should share and learn with each other in an atmosphere of mutual respect. I also want to give a shout out to our AlleyCat Club members. Thank you so much for your monthly financial contributions. We now have our AlleyCat Club member stickers. These are pretty cool. So if you want to get a sticker, if you want to get recognized here, if you just want to support us, you can join the AlleyCat Club too. So visit our website to learn more about our budget priorities and our goals and how you can join the club too. All right, so if you have any questions for our speakers, please add the hashtag AlleyTalks, that's A11YTALKS, or type into the chat window. It can be busy in that chat, so maybe preface any questions with the word question so it's easier to parse if you are participating in the YouTube live stream event. At the end of the presentation, we'll take some time for the Q&A. So today we have Jen Chadwick, who is a senior accessibility strategist, and Elena Chapman, accessibility research manager, and they are both from Fable. And so I've heard that you both live in Toronto and you both love board games. So I need to know, what are your favorite board games?
Ooh, I think I'll have Jen go first to see what she says because we play them together. So I'm curious.
Yeah, what's wonderful. So Elaine and I, yeah, April, thanks for having us. Great question, and it's been a while since I played board games because Elaine and I've sort of connected with some other friends to play the party game, Jackbox party games online. Sort of kept us busy during the pandemic. But a classic board game favorite of mine actually is a Canadian one called Ramoli. It's a card game. Where there's different suits, and it's more like there's trump cards that are going to get you like poker, going to get you some coins. So it's a flat sort of like poker board with lots of coins, and they build up, and you win prizes. No strategy actually at all, but it's a family favorite. So I'll go with that one as my top. But Elena, do you have one or two?
Well, now you need to teach me. I definitely can't decide, but in terms of newish board games, there's one called Wavelength, which is just really cool. And you basically have to be same mentality wavelength as your partner to guess. I won't explain the rules past that, but Jen has played it with me too.
Yes.
And then I am a Dungeons and Dragons person, so tabletop game is definitely on the table. But it's been a while since my friend group has done a campaign, so I'm trying to convince some folks to get back into it.
Nice. All right, cool. So they are going to be presenting Benchmark Your Accessibility and Usability Testing with the Accessibility Usability Scale, the AUS. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you, April. Let's see if you can see the screen, and I will just make sure that I can move through. So I'll just move to our slide here to introduce ourselves a little bit further. So I'm Jen Chadwick. I'm the Senior Accessibility Strategist at Fable. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a white woman with black hair and blue eyes, wearing a really deep green shirt today. I have been a user experience designer probably for the last 18 years, sort of started in a little bit of design and development, visual and graphic design years ago, but then have been working in accessibility and inclusive design for about 10 years. Kind of had an aha moment when we're conducting research, user research at one of the Canadian banks that I was at the time, and just seeing we brought in a variety of different folks to test the mobile app and the desktop features, and just opened it up to assistive technology users, people I'd never, hadn't seen that hardware and software before, and it was a real eye opener as a designer. So I haven't looked back since. So I'm really, really thrilled to be at Fable as a strategist supporting our customers and clients on their accessibility journey. So yeah, over to you, Elena.
Yeah, so I'm Elena Chapman. I'm the Accessibility Research Manager at Fable. I originally come from a background in sign language linguistics, so I'm quite the hand talker during my presentation, but have spent my time being an accessibility specialist, a UX designer, and now in that UX research space where I've landed and will plan to stay for forevermore. But kind of fell more into accessibility given my background. One of my first positions was actually a voice UI designer, which is intrinsically against most things that I learned in my deaf studies work previously. And so it just kind of sent me down the rabbit hole to where we are today, focusing more towards the assistive tech angle for accessibility research and inclusive design. I do want to call out, because we'll be going through some tooling and data today. I just want to call out two of our colleagues, Abid Varani and Dave Whiteside, who played a super huge role in the work that we'll be talking through today. And so always love to give credit where it's due. But yeah, Jen and I are just super excited to kind of have this be really conversational as we talk through some things around accessibility research and the like.
Yeah, I'm really excited to share the stage, Elena, and learn more about and just share the research. And it's one of the key things, this key metric that I've been introduced to at Fable, and that's something that sort of is benchmarking beyond compliance, or what I certainly learned, or what was established early in my career in accessibility as kind of the baseline for at least user experience, which is obviously the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. Legally, in so many places, we have to meet it, but we know, and I'm sure many of us know, it's kind of the floor, it's the baseline that we start from, because a lot of WCAG isn't covered. So it's the relied upon marker for measuring web accessibility. There's 4 principles: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. And then within that, there's 12 sort of sets of guidelines, and then 60 to 80 success criteria to meet certain things. And in the beginning, it covered, a lot of desktop applications, screen reader software, quite a bit, the screen reader experience. And as it's moved between 2.0 to 2.1, and hopefully now 2.2, just coming new and fresh, there's a recognition that there's far more mobile experience out there. There's considerations for cognitive needs and that mobile experience and low vision a little bit better. So it's effective as an evaluative tool, and it's not perfect. There are definitely gaps, but it's difficult to leverage for product-led organizations. Elena, maybe I'll turn it over to you, and I'll actually just move on. We'll stop there at this slide, because we'll talk about where we're going to dive into. But any other thoughts about what you mean by that?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is that what WCAG gives us is a checklist. It's a clear metric. You're able to track how you're doing. And for Fable, and for a lot of folks that we work with, we're looking past just compliance and that usability side. And so for product-led organizations, where you're actively iterating, bringing new features in rapidly, but UX research also typically plays a really big role. We were looking for something that kind of captured that essence of how can we track how we're doing, but on the usability side. And I think that's kind of the crux of what we'll be talking about today.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a couple of things that I definitely want to share from the UX perspective and have this great chat. So the overview is, so the system usability scale, which was created and is an existing metric in, as you say, in user research. But what is the accessibility usability scale? So what is Oz? What are you introducing new and why? And how to leverage it, how to leverage the AUS or Oz, and then benchmarking different assistive technologies or ATs we're going to cover. So what is the system usability scale? I'll just move into this area by talking about measuring usability. As Elena said, like the WCAG guidelines do a lot to almost sort of binary. They're technical, right? They'll tell you whether or not a button has been labeled or a keyboard is compatible with and can function on a page. But that's sort of the bare minimum. It's like the code in this apartment building. It's standing. It survives, or it has doors and windows and elevators. But that doesn't tell me, I didn't buy this apartment unit because it was up to code. I bought it because it's usable and it flows and it suits my lifestyle. So usability, or how easy something's to use, has been traditionally measured in a variety of ways. It's been captured in evaluative research. And by that, it's completion rates, like whether a task can be completed or not, error rates, what's the cadence of errors, and then also like measuring user satisfaction. How did someone feel about that experience? So while completion and error rates are straightforward, quantitative metrics, user satisfaction can be more challenging to quantify. These are the things I've observed sort of on the UX side but Elena, turning it back to you and your expertise in the user research field. Anything else to add, or we can move to the next slide if you like.
Yeah, it's this obviously isn't an exhaustive list of metrics that you can collect in usability research, but more just some we wanted to highlight for you folks. But it's interesting, kind of, we started to look at what traditionally has been applied in the UX research space and see what does and doesn't translate well to accessibility research. And so completion rates, sometimes you don't have to collect it in UX research because folks can get through. But I know, Jen, for us, it's one of the top things of, can someone even just get through the flow? Not even, is it a good time? And so it's interesting kind of what we saw we could and couldn't translate over is what I'm hinting at foreshadowing.
Right.
Yeah.
So
which for this, it takes us into the system usability scale, which was definitely one that we were interested in applying. If you've never heard of it before, you might have heard SUS is what it gets called also. It's a quick 10-question survey, and it allows you to basically get a gut check of how someone's perceived usability of the experience was. It's asking all of these questions in a way where you respond to the comment of, I found the experience easy. Don't quote me, that's not exact phrasing. But you basically say on a scale of 5, strongly agree, strongly disagree, anywhere in between that. And so you take all those numbers, you get a score out of 10. It's not a percentage. The average is 68. If it was a percentage, the average would be 50. But it allows you to kind of tell where your usability is at. It's great because it's cheap in the sense of you can verbally administer it. I've done it on paper forms before. It's really easy to just get into your processes in terms of running research on a regular cadence. It works well for small, large sample size because there's a large data set to support it that gives us that average of 68. And so we're like, this is a really cool method. I've used it in my previous research. let's try it with assistive technology users. And it started to break on us. Curious, Jen, to talk us through some of the gaps.
Yeah, I think it's highly valuable to, as you say, like ask after someone's just completed a task. Imagine it's administered immediately after with emotions are high when the experience is fresh. But then, yeah, like you could translate it into technical compatibility. Again, this is just my perception, so tell me more. But yeah, like compatibility with an AT, sure it was that. But then those are people behind the assistive technologies. So with people with disabilities, the SUS itself, I guess where it also breaks down is that it assumes that all user needs are the same. When with accessibility, that's just not the case, right? There's such a diversity of needs and preferences, as well as user experience with different assistive techs just by nature. So it never really considered the usability needs of diverse users. The SUS didn't. We're trying to do that now. And it doesn't consider the use of assistive technologies. So anything else to add before we move on?
Nah, I think let's illustrate it with an example.
Yeah. All right.
Which I love this one. So this is exact phrasing from the SUS or the SUS. I think that I would need the support of a technical person to be able to use this system. This is verbatim what is given out when you're running the SUS. It's one of the 10 questions. So you might say strongly agree or disagree to this. We started working with this question, and we could have the most tech-savvy technical screen reader user. And if the button just doesn't work, it doesn't work. And that has nothing to do with the support of a technical person. It's, I need the support of a non-assistive technology user. And so we saw this just starting to break with some of the questions that SUS has and how it's phrased. Curious, Jen, anything to add on this one?
Yeah, I think you've pinpointed the most important pieces, which is that person may be technically savvy. They are the technical person, and they're interacting with the not only computer, but they have another piece of hardware, software technically involved. So it just isn't it just doesn't rise to the occasion. It's just not quite a good fit for accessibility, and doesn't really. Yeah, we want to capture the usability and accessibility over the way access is usability for some folks. So yeah, that just brings us to this slide where there's a photo of John Brook, who is the creator of SUS. And it's a quote from him that says, "Hey, if there isn't a relevant questionnaire for your situation, you can devise one." Woohoo. So I think that's precisely what you did.
That's where we took it. So on that note, we'd love to introduce you folks to what the accessible usability scale is. I'll actually have you run to the next slide, Jen. Essentially what we did was, it's not a new survey in any way, shape, or form. On the screen, we have a photo just showing the output of one of the AUS forms, which has our kind of AUS score, what assistive tech folks were on, that configuration, but also the answer to each of the 10 questions is kind of peeking out on the screen. But we remixed the questions for SUS into things that better captured that lived experience for assistive technology users, and just rephrased it so that we're able to get a better sense for what someone's perceived usability is, rather than trying to pigeonhole people into a survey that wasn't designed for them. Essentially, it's an inclusive design approach that we do. I know folks will be given the link. It's fully available. You can use the AUS score to your delight, play with it, see what the questions are, use it to get a gut check on your usability. It's meant to kind of be a UX research tool in the accessibility space at its core. But let's talk through some of the question rephrasing, Jen.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. So on the left-hand side, we have our sus questions. On the right-hand side, we have our rephrased question. I'll read sus, and then Jen, I'll have you switch to AUS. So first up, we have, I think that I would need the support of a technical person to be able to use this system, which got switched to.
I think that I would need the support of another person to use all the features of this website.
Yeah, so stripping out that technical phrasing and just making it of a question really about independence at its core, which for each of the sus questions, we looked at what's the core feature of this question, what's trying to be measured. And so this being focused on independence in that sense. We have another example. I will call out, we didn't have to change all of sus. There are some questions that actually were able to be retained between the two versions. But for the next one, I would imagine that most people would learn to use this system very quickly.
Translated to, I would imagine that most people with my assistive technology would learn to use this website quickly.
Yeah, I just swallowed wrong. I'm quite the water drinker for folks. But this one was, we found that when we were designing AUS, we were working collaboratively with folks who use assistive tech, and the feedback around this question was really, well, most people meaning non-assistive technology users, or do you mean other assistive technology users, or do you mean a screen reader user? And so we found it needing to be grounded in space and time, and with people's perception of what that usability with, which is an extremely personal part of how you experience the web. It's at an individual level. And so we found that the question was too broad. And I feel like this goes back to a point you made earlier, Jen, about sus was designed without any segmentation in mind. And we found that it just doesn't translate well to assistive technology users specifically.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So to your point, that assistive technology on the other end of that end user experience can be very different. It's just by nature very different. So it was too generic. Okay, so yeah, you ran the numbers. There's a lot of data that was collected. This was launched a while ago, I believe.
Yeah, we're getting to the point where we can almost say 3 years. It was November 2020. So we've had a lot of time with Oz to kind of see trend lines, to find ways for it to be valuable for folks, to just implement into their UX research practice when you're working with assistive technology users. But the other cool thing is we've actually hit over 4,000 data points now, which is a high thing on our list, because part of the credibility to sus is that there's huge swaths of data that support that average of 68. And so we're interested in having that comparable for Oz, in the sense of benchmarks that folks can measure themselves against, because that's one of the things that makes sus easy to pick up and just use, is being able to know, hey, how am I doing compared to others, and just have that benchmarking angle.
Yeah, as you say, benchmarking against others, and then consistent, repeatable, trusted source of a score to, when you consistently run tests, you're continuously improving the accessibility of a product or an application. And you can rerun Oz to match or benchmark those scores a couple of months down the line, or whenever that redesign happens. Would you say that's the case too?
Yeah, we'll definitely go into kind of different ways to leverage Oz, but I find that at the start, a lot of folks will ask, how are others doing? But I'm a strong proponent that the most useful SUS and AUS score is one that you build on your own products, in the sense of knowing, okay, this is where our sign-in flow is sitting versus here's where our create an account flow. You have your benchmark for each of them, and then you can say like, oh, well, sign in is actually, those perceived usability scores are lower. Maybe that's where we spend our time, because I feel like you know this more than anyone. Folks get so overwhelmed with where do I start with improving the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so anything that helps you prioritize can be a key proponent for maturing your team. Curious if you have anything there.
One last thing I would say is I think that's really important to point out. So as a user experience, UX lead, or sort of kind of the product owner, or for one particular area on the site, or one particular product that was being sold on the e-commerce site, that login is one thing, but then like the chat, the shopping cart is more complex. So it may have the same components, which in themselves you could test for accessibility. But you really see that value of the difference in the score when someone navigates the login, and then they experience a different page that may have more complexity, or there are more tasks to complete. Like you can get that granular with and trusted with a metric like Oz, because I think that's really important. So just from the UX perspective, I totally see the value. So I think we'll quickly move on to what you said. We're going to see how you can leverage the OS in your work.
We'll definitely go back and forth on these slides, because I'm curious your experience with applying some of these things. But research-wise, so on the screen, we have a graph called SUS versus AUS, and we have 4 different parts of the experience: login, reset password, add to cart, cancel an order. Something I've seen for folks who do general population or Gen Pop research alongside assistive technology users is they'll collect the SUS and the AUS. And so you're able to kind of compare how our non-assistive technology users, how their perceived usability is versus those assistive technology user scores. And so we have, this is fake data, I'll warn everyone, but it's more to illustrate the point of knowing kind of, okay, for login, reset password, cancel order, our AUS and our SUS scores are quite similar. And then for add to cart, we have our SUS score sitting above a 75 and our AUS sitting between 50 and 25. And so that's a target area. It's kind of just different ways to slice and dice your data depending on what you collect. There's different stories you can tell and different ways to communicate your findings, but comparing it with non-assistive technology users can be quite a powerful tool in terms of the UX Researcher Toolkit. Curious, Jen, if you have any other notes on Gen Pop versus assistive technology research?
No, I wish I did. I really, really appreciate your guidance here. Just an observation when I work with, with product teams or design teams, when we review the research done with the Oz, is just an added dimension, just to say yes. And when you look at, here we have assistive technology users, and you'll get to this, but when you break it down between different assistive technology, screen reader, screen magnification, or like an alternative navigation experience, the score could be very different. So that also just serves to remind teams, when I'm working with them, design teams, to regularly consider not just one person, so like that myopic UX design experience, designing for someone just like yourself, but you can really, really measure the diversity of the experiences. So, a screen reader experience may be score 93, and then I've also seen, alt nav users, that score is 63. And then it does help to identify what areas to focus on when you remediate. But that's from me. So, and then I think I'm just moving to the next slide about another the measurement of like a Oz over time.
I was about to say, Jen, it's almost like you know what the next slide is. For this one, we have a line graph that is AUS by AT type over time. And I love that you kind of primed us here, Jen, that separating out different assistive technology types is actually vital. We find with accessibility research, which was something that really deviates from SUS in terms of how you think about the data. On a previous slide, I forgot to voice it over, but we had a graphic that showed the number 65. That's actually our current average AUS weighted average, meaning that it's taking our screen reader average, our screen magnification average, and our alternative navigation average. And it's averaging those three numbers together. And that's giving us that 65, which is quite close to our SUS average of 68. I do want to do a quick side note because it's more of a fable term. Alternative navigation covers anything that augments a mouse or keyboard for our purposes. So this is where eye gaze lives. It's where speech to text software lives. It's on-screen keyboard, things like that. Switch systems all live in that category of alt nav that you'll see Jen and I throw around. But for this graph, so it's AUS by AT type over time. So we've separated out our line for screen reader from our screen magnification from our alt nav. And we have three buckets. So we have a quarter, essentially displayed of September, October, and November. And so this is implying research on a single product, which you mentioned, Jen, that reoccurrence of checking that experience. Maybe you do a deployment. And so for this one, we have our trend lines for screen reader and alt nav, and they're pretty stable. One sitting around 50, going up towards 60. The other one sitting at 75 and staying around 75. And then we have our magnification user, which starts at a 75, dips to a 40, and gets back up to a 75. And so the implication here is you're able to tell if something you've launched maybe didn't hit the mark. Is kind of a nice way to keep track of your usability over time, we find. This can be useful for keeping track of if one development team is kind of launching new features, kind of checking their health over time of how are they doing. Are certain users getting underserved? It's another way to think about prioritization, but it's nice because it lets you, when you take the data and you think about it by AT type, you're able to say like, oh, we don't have to fix everything all at once. Let's focus on, oh no, we launched a new font and no one likes it. Like it lets you kind of pinpoint a bit better. Jen, thoughts on this one?
No, I think you've covered everything, and yeah, it just immediately came to mind, and so we just segued perfectly. Thanks you for the deeper dive into this. So yeah, I think I'm moving to the next slide, which has a link. A quote from Jane Doe, who's a JAWS screen reader user. What does she say?
Yeah, this one, I'll read out the slide. So, oh, this part opens up. I had no idea until I accidentally selected it. We have a quote from her. We have some metrics. Her AUS score is at a 68. Suspiciously on average. But recommend is a maybe. Was she able to complete the task? Yes. We have some pain points listed out, some game points. And what this slide is getting at is triangulation of data. So I want, as we end this section on how to leverage AUS, want to make sure that folks know, along with any metric, it's one piece of the larger puzzle. And so you always want to color it with other pieces of information, especially because it's that perceived usability score. People run into hidden barriers. And you might not actually know that you didn't succeed at the task or you weren't able to fully submit your order. You might have thought you could. And so you could have a perceived usability score that's quite high in the 80s, 90s, but then a completion rate of 0. And so having those different pieces of data is what lets you get a full picture of the usability. You can never get it from one data source. And that's true for any UX research. It's important to have all sides and points of view on that data set. And so AUS is no different. Yeah, I have one other thought, Jen, but curious if you have anything to add.
No, just to say that this is a really important thing to point out, that's valuable. So it's the perception of the usability, we're capturing it, as well as, and then in reality, I was able to sort of work around and correct things, and it wasn't great, but I got through the task. So, but you can also, like the pain and gain points, identify specific experience points for a designer or a developer or someone to say, how do I fix this? So it really is important to have, like, perceived usability is just as important as the experience itself. Absolutely. Back to your thought, the last thought.
Yeah, I want to leave some warnings that there are instances where AUS is not the metric to use. If you're working with folks who aren't assistive technology users, it's not going to get you what you want. You might want SUS. You might want to apply it in that case because it really is phrased for assistive technology. It's looking at that layer between your user, your assistive technology, and then the product. Whereas SUS is looking at just user to product relationship. The other thing is it needs to be task-based research. So you have to have some form of clear objective that needs to be accomplished by the end. Otherwise, AUS won't be able to actually glean the right type of data. If someone's just kind of searching through aimlessly, there's no goal in sight, because you want folks to navigate it as a user and kind of experience it in that sense. So generative research where you're doing a discovery phase, that's not something where either SUS or AUS play a role. The other warning, which I feel like, Jen, you might be able to add to, is that perceived usability is really key. Because I know I've experienced folks going like, I got my data back. The score is too high.
Right. When we conduct research, and we work with teams, they think it's too high, right? Interesting. Yeah. It's really, really interesting. Nothing else to add, but just to say I've seen that too.
Yeah, it's a funny one because it's what your participant experiences, and everyone's a different person. So there's always that angle to it. But also there's a pain tolerance of some folks are fine with an experience that isn't fully accessible, and so they might give a higher AUS score, whereas you have other folks who are like absolutely not, 0. So it's why like triangulating data is so important. It should never be your only score that you're relying on to make your story and make your case as a researcher or accessibility specialist, depending who's running it. We have about 7 minutes left. We're going to go into the fun side. Well, not that everything before this wasn't fun, but this is more the nerdy side for myself, because we had such a large data set last year. We started to dig into it and see if we could get some trends, because to Jen's note, we knew that averaging probably wasn't what we wanted. Already in inclusive design, looking at the average always makes us feel a little questioning of the work that we're doing, because the second you start to average, you're losing the edge in a lot of ways. Absolutely. And so we're gonna look at some of the data from the AUS data set. And so for this on the screen, we have a graph that says figure 1, screen readers are falling behind. And so we looked at our data set, looked at those weighted averages, and saw where different assistive technologies sat. And so we have screen readers at the top in bright pink at a 55, which is lower than our 60, 65 average for AUS in terms of that weighted average. Screen readers are under it with the 55 mark. Next, we have alt-nav users who are at 67, so a little bit above. And then we have magnification users who are at a 72, meaning that if you get an AUS average of 65, but it's a screen magnification user, you're actually under the average for magnification users. So that's why that kind of weighted average loses some color, in the sense of if you have a 65, it's your AUS average. So you're like, okay, we aren't the best, we aren't the worst, we're in the neutral range. 65 for screen readers is actually above average. So you're doing quite good. But once you look at your other AT types, it's like, actually, some folks are being underserved. So there's that side to it. The other side, though, is just what this data is telling us is that on average, screen reader users are going to have a worse time, which surprised none of us when we were looking at the data. But to be able to have a data set that kind of points to that was just a really interesting state to be in. Once we actually dug into the numbers and looked at the data points we were digging into. Jen, curious, has anyone kind of used these different averages in your experience, or any notes about it?
Yeah, without putting me on the spot, I've definitely seen them and presented them back when sort of a strategy for changes. And I think that's a key thing to remember, is that like screen readers have traditionally and it's important to recognize that they're going to have a harder time with that, so to look at the odds and break it out and look at each of those individually. Teams are doing that with it. They're taking advantage of that, I find, when we work together. So that's good. Okay, yeah. So on to average score by screen reader. Oh, yeah, by the screen reader type. Okay.
Yeah, we had enough data at this stage to actually look at specific screen readers. And so interesting here was JAWS at a 57, NVDA at a 55, VoiceOver at a 50.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so we did find that these were statistically significant. Number one, this is from a report that we actually have a full blog post for. So I know our lovely hosts will be putting the links for folks to access both the report on just by assistive technology type, but also specifically for screen readers, because I think we won't have time to dig too much into it. But I think to skip over the next two slides, the main cruxes, it was really interesting that NVDA was our Goldilocks of it. It never was, when we started to break things down at the question level, at those 10 questions of how are folks answering each of these questions individually. NVDA was never the worst, and I think it only had one. It was higher than the others, and so it was just interesting to see that the screen reader that is open source, developed by the community, is the one that kind of has that sense of it gets the job done, is kind of what the data was telling us, which was a cool finding.
That is yeah.
I think from here, should we wrap, Jen?
Yeah, I think we can always talk about, those breakdown. We can share any of those pieces in the chat or in a Q&A or afterwards. But yeah, Elena, where do we go from here?
So with our data set ever expanding, we're definitely planning to look towards screen reader mobile next, as we get enough data points to feel we can do it justice and dig in there. The other side, though, is all of the data of analyzing the AUS is done on averages. And so tinkering around and seeing what does looking at the outer edge instead of the average actually give us when in relation to a large data set. Was kind of an interesting thing we're playing around with.
That's awesome. I'm really excited to continue observing you do that, and then just get that regular feedback from the teams that we work with, or the community here, like and the industry here. So, April, our last slide is just a huge thank you to everyone who is here and to you. And then there's my email address, Jennifer@makeitfable.com, and Elena's, Elana, ELANA @makeitfable.com. And then makeitfable.com/AUS for the site. And then we're on LinkedIn under Make It Fable or just Fable. But yeah, that's our deck here. Should I pass it back?
Cool. Well, thank you for joining us. Actually, we can hide my screen right now. We're going to do the questions first. Let's see. My handy dandy tech person is going to put a question. Oh, look, we got one. What got you both started in accessibility?
Ooh, let's start with you, Jen. I love hearing your origin story.
I kind of launched into it passionately. I always do that when I introduce myself. It truly was like almost not a shock, but just like an illumination of when we did conduct, it was user research at one of our large financial institutions here in Toronto. Being able to observe or see the SUS in play, observe and see people using our products and services, the hardware and software, and then any designs that were presented. I've never seen anyone say, hoping that they would fill out, or what did they think of that sort of like credit card form where they were going to fill out on their mobile device. And this woman who was using Siri just said, I never do that. It takes too long. I'm just going to use my voice to dictate this. Mind blown. And I couldn't look away. And I just recognized something that like maybe I certainly struggle with it as a designer, as I don't know what I don't know, or I'm not the end user. I can't just design for me. So I had the opportunity to, we were doing a WIC, I got it at the time. So like all of our products and services were being assessed. And I just had this really great opportunity to become an internal champion for those, for those end user experiences, or working closely when we were annotating our designs at the same time as building prototypes and stuff and testing, is just to say, like, is accessibility been considered? And or like, as a designer, if you've never understood what a screen reader has said to you, like, or what that even looks like, let's get people with disabilities involved in this. And fill out as much as we can. But user research was definitely, funny enough, I have to thank it for being the catalyst for my launch into accessibility. Elena, how did you get into it?
Yeah, the convoluted story is I'm originally from the States before I moved up to Canada. And my area of New York, my school had a deaf and hard of hearing program, which means it was an integrated school, but compared to usually where someone kind of just gets stuck in a classroom on their own with an interpreter, we actually had like a whole program where folks were kind of brought in within an hour like bus radius to the school. So for my high school, which was about 400 kids, about 40 were identified as deaf or hard of hearing. And so it was one of those things where you grow up and you're like, oh, I know so-and-so, but you're a child talking to another kid through an adult. And so your relationship isn't as deep as you might think it is at first. And my last year of high school, they offered American Sign Language to the hearing students for the first time. And the lovely thing about American Sign Language and most sign languages is that it's very easy to be conversational. I will not say anything about actual proficiency in the language, but you're trying so hard to be understood and the other person is trying so hard to understand you that I was having chats very quickly. And it was one of those realizations of, oh, I missed out on like true friendship just because I didn't know this language. And so pivoted hard into deaf studies and ASL linguistics. And then in typical academic fashion, had my crisis of academia and found someone who I really respected in the sign language linguistics field, who'd written a whole article about how all of their skills translated to UX research, which was kind of an easy switch over to do for a career change and just pivot into the UX design and research space. And it was one of those things where without accessibility, I felt like something was missing. And so it was a very natural gravitation back into digital accessibility at that stage.
Far more fascinating.
No, don't start.
Right, our next question. Can you share some stories of those who have used the AUS?
Yeah, I can start, Jen, if that makes sense.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, what's been fun is it's a double-sided thing. So within the Fable context, our community members are filling it out. And so it's fun getting to hear also the participant reaction to AUS, because I'd always gotten that with SUS. When I was running research with SUS, someone fills out the form and they're like, ugh. That was really weird phrasing, because if you use the original wording, it says system and things like that. And so what was actually like personally just a delight when I started using AUS was folks were like, oh, I got to have like the last word, because we were able to rephrase it to our desire. The SUS is, I want to say the 80s. I should have the date. It was released off the top of my head, but it's been a hot minute. Mm-hmm. So there's that side where we also have participants using it and giving us feedback on it all the time. But in terms of folks using it, I see a lot using it for that benchmarking reason, which is why we like to highlight it, because it's what we see people using it for. And what's nice is that there are a few folks, we know that it's part of the definition of done, is having that usability score, which is quite unusual, to just be honest there, of it's unusual to have a usability score play a role in, we won't launch this until users enjoy it. And so just seeing folks who are really mature in their usability and accessibility practice, using things like Oz and completion rates and other metrics to actually say, like, you know what, we aren't good to launch yet. We aren't there yet, is a really nice thing to see Oz kind of bloom into.
Yeah, just quickly, I absolutely everything you said. I've seen that too, where you kind of have to demonstrate to leadership, or any in any mature organization, or those still on that accessibility inclusive design journey, that the ability to benchmark with sort of a trusted metric with those like dimensions in it just puts it right next, and it complements WCAG as a measurement. So many companies we work for really are passionate and important, see the importance of usability testing. That's where accessibility really comes into play. It's not just WCAG as a checklist. So they're valuing usability. They have this benchmarking score that they can present back in, share internally, and demonstrate there's a way to measure this, just as you may have trusted WCAG, which you still can, but this is entirely different and equally important.
A compliment.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I guess everybody loves a good score and a good benchmarking, so it kind of like tricks them into using something that is actually using user feedback, right? I mean,
Just
I
do
don't know.
it.
Sometimes people have to be tricked. I don't. All right. Do we have another question, Kat? Okay, here we go. So, do you see any advantage to weighting the results from different AT? Why did you decide to take an average? You covered this a little bit. You want to?
Yeah, the weighted average is actually quite important just in the sense of we have way more data for screen reader users. So if we didn't do a weighted average for the AUS score, it'd be really skewed for that experience. And so that's why we're starting to look at like by AT type as we get enough data, but like as just a basic stat reason, that's why it's a weighted average for AUS because we have those three groups. Why did we decide to take the average? That was to mirror SUS at the end of the day. SUS works off of an average. That average makes it really convenient to see like where you're at. And so we were trying to provide that same convenience while still in the back of our mind keeping that question of, is this the right way that we want to do this forever? Probably not. But keeping that door open to play around with it while providing folks kind of immediate value was the reason for the average for now.
Yeah, kind of to bounce off that just a little bit.
Yeah.
Do you see any like versioning? Like if somebody wanted to keep a certain I guess algorithm, could they use the classic version of the data analysis? Like, have you thought about that?
Yeah, we've talked so much about versioning the AUS, and part of digging into that large data set was to basically validate, do we need a 2.0? We're still working off of AUS 1.0. The data told us, because what we were looking for is lack of variation in responses. Because if you are testing, exploring multiple different experiences and you're always getting a 4 for one of those questions, something's wrong. And so what was actually really validating for us was that there was variation across all 10 questions. And so right now we're in the mindset of we're not going to version AUS. The one that we have out is giving us data and giving us meaningful data. There's always a future to version it, and then you have to start clean with your data set. And so AUS 1.0 is where these averages sit. If there's a 2.0, it'll have to have different numbers because the data set will be different. Really testing the limits of my stats knowledge here, April.
Nothing to add.
Yeah, Jen's hiding.
I love statistics, but I don't have a depth of knowledge of it. I just think it's cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think we have time for maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap up. Which AT user groups does AUS report have the most difficulty with digital products?
Yeah. Sorry, I'm taking all the questions. Jen, feel free to jump in. That's when we look at the by AT type, we see screen readers at that 55. And so it's definitely the implication that if you only have the resources to start in one place, your screen reader experience might be that. But again, that benchmark on your own product, you might have like a super slick screen reader experience. And so starting there might not be the answer for you specifically. Instead, maybe your magnification users are the ones that are underserved. And so the data set is to say, like, without doing any research anywhere, you're probably going to improve something if you start kind of looking at your screen reader user experience. But building up that benchmark for yourself and understanding your own context for your products and how those are performing is going to unlock a lot of value for yourself in terms of where you're spending your time, resources, and energy. Time and energy being most resources. But all that to say, it's meant to be a powerful prioritization tool, but the more you personalize it to your own experience, the more powerful it becomes.
Absolutely. And maybe just like as a note, which AT user groups does the Oz report? Is it fair to say that you wouldn't know the difference, or you wouldn't be able to answer that question without the Oz? Like the sus wouldn't be able to, it's too generic. It doesn't deepen, it doesn't diversify amongst the groups. So that's one of the key values I see. And I totally on that side of project management, product, how do we remediate, how do we improve? And that time and energy conversation and that prioritization piece is really, that just pricks my ears up certainly when we're working with teams and strategies on what to focus on. So yeah, cool.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us today, and for everyone here in the audience listening in. I'm just going to wrap up a little bit here. So it's just a reminder, we're always looking for speakers and new voices in the accessibility community. And a reminder for those with IAAP certifications, Ally Talk speakers and attendees receive professional development credits, the CAEC, through IAAP for your continuing education. And we also make a conscious effort to include marginalized groups in tech in our speaker lineup. So please let us know if you have any ideas on how to make Ally Talks more friendly to all. And then subscribe to our YouTube channel to never miss a talk. So you're probably watching us on YouTube, and so you can click one of those buttons somewhere. And then consider contributing to Ally Talks through our Open Collective page. If you join the Ally Talks, the Ally Cat Club, you can get a sticker in the mail. I'll be sending those out pretty soon. Follow us on Twitter at A11YTALKS. And we're also on Mastodon. That's mstdn.social@A11YTALKS. Good times in spelling things out. All right, so everyone, have a great rest of your day, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, April. Thanks, Elena. And thanks everyone.
See ya.
See ya.